Hey, everybody. So welcome to Bridging Dimensions show on the Marguerite Rigoglioso YouTube channel. I'm Marguerite, and today I have a very, very exciting show about Pleiades wisdom and Indigenous grandmothers. Yes, the Pleiades are not just a New Age thing. They're not just a ancient Greek thing either. They are a worldwide human origin story. And we're going to explore that today with my guest, Kristine Marie Hill, who is a member of the Beaver Clan in the Tuscarora Nation of the Haudenosaunee, sometimes known as the Iroquois Confederacy. So this is in the northeastern part of the United States. And before we go into that, I just want to say hello to everybody. Hope you're having good holiday time. We are part of Seven Sisters Mystery School, which of course is named after the Seven Sisters of the Pleiades. One day Marguerite, she thought of the idea for the school in the shower because I had been researching extensively on the Pleiades, felt very, very drawn to them. And it wasn't even, a fully conscious choice to name my school that, but I just knew I was going somewhere. And so now, 13 years later, essentially, the layers of why I chose this name of this school are becoming apparent. And so one day, a couple of months ago, Kristine called me and she said, I think I need to talk to you. I'm getting the nudge, and I'm going to have her talk about that in a minute. But as part of her lineage with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, she really takes her responsibility of peacekeeping and respecting the land and waterways of her peoples seriously. And she's been practicing Indigenous peacekeeping for more than 25 years in the context of educational and familial systems of her home community on the Tuscarora Reservation. And that's in the Buffalo, New York area, Kristine? The Tuscarora?
Yeah, near Niagara Falls.
Oh, near Niagara Falls, right. And so she's serving the next generation's reacquisition of their language, traditions, and ceremonies. And she's also the proud mother of 4 adult children and 6 grandchildren, several of whom speak the Tuscarora language that her grandmother was forced to forget in the Carlisle boarding school. There is so much more to know about Kristine, but at the end, we will have her talk about her website and maybe a little bit of her other work. But welcome, Chrissy.
Thank you. It's good to see you, and I'm happy to be here. And part of what we do as Haudenosaunee people often, when we start a doings or an event, we have something called the Thanksgiving Address, the words before all else. I'm not going to do the full thing here, but I would like to acknowledge certain things that we have gratitude for in the natural world and the connectedness of all beings. And with our focus today on the stars, I just would like to open up with those words of gratitude and thanks to our stars, that we have lost so much of our knowledge that has not been able to be handed down, but we're grateful that those stars are doing their duty as they have been instructed. For when the time comes for us to remember, they will be there for us. They remind us that the stars are beautiful, and they dampen our plant life. They provide directions at night, and they help us look toward the sky world and remember our original instructions. They provide us direction, and they make us feel good when they see us, for they are our relatives, and they are our timekeepers. And in midwinters, at the zenith of the viewing of the Pleiades, we have our midwinter ceremony. When the Pleiades set on the horizon, it is time to plant. And when they rise in August, the harvest begins. And to the best of my ability, I'd like to give our greetings and thanks to the stars and the ways that we can be guided from sky world to earth. Now,
Oh, that is so, so beautiful. I love that. Yes. So why don't we start with what nudged you to contact me a few months ago for a conversation, which then led to my inviting you here today?
Yeah, well, oh, we got some feedback.
Do we have some feedback?
Yeah, let's
Maybe it's our star allies. Well, I'm not doing it too badly on my end, so
okay, let's I will just go slow. Maybe that's what I need to do. Is a few years ago we met each other. We were sitting next to each other at a rather large table, was holding maybe 20, 25 people, and you and I sat next to each other, and as a matter of polite introductions, shared our names. And it's like, oh, you have a mystery school, Seven Sisters. Oh, I know stories about the Seven Sisters. And over time, we have grown our relationship and had more conversations. And at the time, um, there wasn't anything to call you about and say, hey, nudge, nudge, like, hey, let's talk. But that's how relationships grow, through that. And so late this summer in August, as the timeline says, there's a time to start harvesting. And I have a colleague in Ecuador, and I have a colleague in Australia, and they have been talking about the Pleiades as governance, and how to engage with that, as we have someone from the Pacific Ocean and the mountains of the Andes to someone else on the other side of the ocean in the middle of an island, um, talking about the same thing. And I was talking about it too. And so the three of us had been talking a little about Pleiades governance, what it means that we all get to see these stars. And so that's when, I'm kind of sitting with that. And it's like, I know someone I can call to talk more about this, because we've had the Indigenous conversations, and I knew Marguerite does so much more with these stories. So I'm like, hey, Marguerite, wanna have a talk? So
that's right. We were like, it's like, this is how it works. You just had the inkling that we should talk. You didn't really even know what about. But
mm,
then when you started telling me about these other two women and all these Pleiadian stories that were coming to the fore, I'm like, hey, I am actually teaching about the Pleiades in conjunction with my Mary and Magdalene priestess training, talking about basically the Marys as being extensions of the seven sisters of the Pleiades, moving into the eight
mhm.
and nine sisters and so forth. Mother Mary, in a sense, being that eighth sister who brought a divine birth child to the planet, because these women had high level pregnancies, conceptions, and brought in, at least in the Greek tradition, brought these major figures to the planet, and in the Greek tradition are said to have seeded large portions of humanity. And of course, what do you find out? Every continent, pretty much, of the world, many, many cultures say we came from the Pleiades. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, what do the Haudenosaunee believe about the Pleiades and the origins of your people?
Yeah, and that's one of the fascinating things is I was at an event just last month, the week before Thanksgiving, and I actually heard one of the Mohawk elders speaking of this coming from the stars. And that's actually the first time I had heard it coming from an elder, with my own ears. I've heard teachings, I've heard other people talk about it, read a few things here and there, but to hear it in which the way he said it,
Wow.
it was just incredible to hear this transmission that he was providing. And again, the Pleiades as a guiding, ways to light the path towards remembering our original instructions is so important. And so, as with many Haudenosaunee stories, as with many stories within those stories, the um, the first sister um, is supposed to be our sky woman, and
Really?
the
Really?
star, yeah.
Really?
That's one of the stories I've heard is the first star is Sky Woman, and
Oh my gosh, and I did not know Sky Woman was connected as a Pleiadian sister. My gosh.
right. So again, these stories when we start sharing them, we recognize like almost the universal truth of these the way these stories land. And after you and I talked, and then I got to hear this elder speak, it's like, oh, it makes sense. And so, in that way, I always feel like any knowledge that we have had that has been interrupted, corrupted, set aside, lost, whatever the reason, when we talk to others, we can find ways of it transmitting back to us. And that, I think that was one of the big nudges, Marguerite, in talking to you, is like, oh, okay, but there's parts that I'm not holding. And so I think that is part of these original instructions, is talk to each other and find out what each other are holding, so we have an abundance, so that we can build this lattice work to make us stronger, rather than looking at the scarcity of knowledge or why I don't have knowledge passed to me.
That's right.
So, thinking about all of that and our story of the grandmother moon and our instructions, which I think is probably another call, another story time.
That's
Um,
right. That's right. But tell me a little bit more about the story of Sky Woman, because yes, I had been aware. And also, I might add that the Haudenosaunee tradition has the story of the Peacemaker, who was essentially what I'm calling divinely conceived,
mhm,
in that there was no father of the child. I mean, this woman, um, uh, Gahedasuk, right? Gahedasuk, the mother, and then
mhm,
her mother went out into the woods, right? And up in Canada. And I've gone actually into that area. I thought I had an invitation, but then I got 100 mosquito bites and hives. So I don't know. Maybe I wasn't supposed to go in there, but
mhm.
with an open heart. My friend Maureen Walton, who lives up there in Canada, and she and I have taught about the Peacemaker. We went there with great reverence to this land where the Peacemaker had essentially been conceived. So there's a major divine birth story in the Haudenosaunee. And I know we'll talk about governance and Hiawatha and Jigonhsasee and Tatadaho in a bit. But tell me, what is the story then of Sky Woman? She
Yeah,
fell.
well, I mean, she was living in Sky World. And when in Sky World, it was not about being human. It was being the celestial beings. And there's many different stories, but ultimately what happens is Sky Woman, named Mature Flower, um, fell through a hole in their creation, in their world. And she fell out of Sky World, and she fell through the stars. She fell through the atmosphere. She fell through the clouds. And as she was falling, she could see a brown dot. And as she got closer, the brown dot was getting bigger. And the brown dot was the back of a turtle. And so she landed um, with care on this great turtle back. And amongst this, in all the water, there are other animal forms, birds and water creatures and things like that, on what we know as Great Turtle Island. And they looked at this thing that fell from the sky, and they knew it was living, they knew it was breathing, they knew it was helpless. And at that time there was no genders, right? They wouldn't have known it was a he or a she. They just knew that it was a being that was in need of survival, in need of comfort and care. And so they worked together. The geese and the birds helped her travel to land on the back of the turtle's back. The many different types of animals tried to go get earth from the bottom of the waters. And in one story, it's muskrat dives down the deepest that they can and come up with a little pot full of dirt to put on the back of turtle. And muskrat ended up sacrificing their life. Because they had run out of air by the time they got back to the surface, all not knowing what this thing was. And in the way of falling, Mature Blossom had grabbed some seeds and some things off the roots of where she had fallen. And so she was disoriented, and she saw this dirt, and she just started dancing and dancing and dancing and spreading this little bit of dirt until it turned into more. And so that's, she's known, women are known, females are known as the keepers of the earth, of the land, within our stories. And as time goes, she was pregnant. She had a child. That child had twins. Her daughter had died. And then, in terms of these origin stories, that the head of her daughter was turned into Grandmother Moon, and her body was used to plant the three sisters, the corns, beans, and squash.
Wow.
And so there's just I'm trying to shorten it up, so it might feel a little confusing as I'm speaking of these things, but just recognizing that we come from stars. We are all stardust. Yeah. And so this origin story keeps us in that. We don't have a separation of science and formalized religion. It was a way of being, and it was a way of being in practice, a way of being in ceremony. And so the way that the story goes, that is how we get humans. And we become humans that are connected to all of the things and have the gratitude. And again, apologies for how it kind of can sound confusing, but I also know that we don't have 2 or 3 weeks to tell the whole story.
That's right. But this is fascinating because as I hear what you're saying, Sky Woman came through a portal, essentially, when we say a hole in the sky.
Yes.
She came through a portal, and this is familiar territory to, those I've been teaching, and that William Henry talks about the Pleiades as sort of materializing, into this dimension, coming through portals, and then being able to parthenogenetically give birth. Sky Woman, there's no talk really of a husband or anything, right? She's just somehow pregnant, right? And so is there any talk of 6 other sisters that are part of the Pleiades in your story?
Well, not in our story, because we are the Haudenosaunee, but when I speak to my brothers and sisters in the Andes and in the oceans, they speak of other parts of the story and not of the one sister. So we are only really engaging with the one sister, knowing that there are the other sisters out there with the same type of stories from the different mountains and the different oceans.
That's fascinating, because it's almost like, well, the Haudenosaunee, who came to consist of 5 and then 6 nations who came together, then are the lineage of that eldest Pleiad. And I don't know if that would be in the Greek tradition. Maya, she's Mature Blossom is what she's called, right? But Maya is considered the eldest of the Pleiades. So it might be that this is describing how the seedings of these Pleiadian sisters took place over the planet. And they one may have focused in one area, another may have focused in another, or they might have been a grouping of 7 that came in a holographic way to various cultures looking like them. Like, that's one of the things I've found, is that the Pleiades end up creating different races. So they're seen as that race, right? The 7 sisters are seen as that race. So you've been talking a lot about instructions from the Pleiades.
Right.
So in the Haudenosaunee tradition, maybe you could talk about what do you feel are those instructions, and are you aware of what instructions there might be for other peoples who have Pleiadian origin stories?
Oh, that's a fascinating question, and yeah, I do recognize I've been using the words original instructions, and that is a way of just as I started out with the gratitude and the acknowledgement of interconnectedness. That is part of the original instructions. Just that. But in order to do that, there's many other things that you have to do, and there's ways to ask for help. The burning of tobacco is one of those ways to send the message up to the heavens, up to Comet, up to the stars, to say, hey, I need to talk, or I need to listen. I have questions. And so being in ceremony is a way to engage with those original instructions. Being in practice is a way to try to embody that as we have these challenges as living, breathing humans, that have both the spiritual life, the emotional life, and the physical life, which includes the intellect. And so being in practice, you have to figure out how to engage all of those. And the original instructions is that sense of being connected. You're not siloed. It's about having love and compassion. It's about, when you think about those animals that all got together as this being was falling from this portal, from this hole in the sky. They didn't know if this person was going to bring colonization. They didn't know anything other than we are all connected and we must do what we can to help each other survive.
And that, yes, and that unity, energy and value is so much a part of the Pleiades from all over the world. They're all about unity in diversity and diversity in unity. And so the instructions that I personally receive from them and teach about is how to foster the unity again, and within our cultures and among our cultures.
Right. Right.
And
And that actually ties back to what you were saying about the peacemaker and the place of the peacemaker's birth. And it is said that he's had um, either some physical disabilities or neuro disabilities, that he was unable to speak and really have a clear message. And he had to go out and look for someone who could really understand and say things in a different way that other people could understand. And that is this diversity and unity idea of coming together. Like, frequently there are things that I can say, but not everybody hears them. But I also need someone to say other things so that folks can hear it. Or maybe others might say something and I say it, and then I can be heard. And so it's also, a sharing of these practices amongst ourselves, because we're the ones that are here right now.
And that's fascinating, the idea that the peacemaker was born a little bit divergent, different, hadn't fully maybe incarnated as the perfected human that can speak and so forth. So he had some, we might call them disabilities. So tell us then the story about Hiawatha. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah,
And
that's what we're going to go with on this. As I mentioned, there's many names, there's many ways of saying even Haudenosaunee, depending on who you hear speak it, it will sound different because of the 6 different languages, and the evolution of those languages over time, and the other influences. So, Hiawatha was a man who was in great grief. His wife, sisters, daughters had all been he'd experienced the loss of their life, and many of it through violence and sickness. And he was a leader of a village, and he exiled himself. he excluded himself. He took himself out of relationship. He took himself out of community. And he was in the woods for quite a long time, wailing and crying. And throughout the story, the Peacemaker had made his way, and they converged. And the Peacemaker had spent some time watching Hiawatha, this man who was in grief and very, very unconsolable. And he saw him, and he was working with materials, and he was trying to make beads, and he was trying to make the strings to make the beads. And he could see him, the Peacemaker was watching him, and watching him fail time after time after time, just not quite getting the right tightness, or maybe the material was too fragile. And at some point he walked up to him, and he didn't say anything, but he just started working with him, and they started working together, these materials, to try to create a beads on a string. And eventually they got to the point of finding some materials that could work together. They found ways that they could work together. And finally, the Peacemaker said to him, "Okay, I see that your mind together has come together as one." And he's like, "Now you can hear these words. Let me wipe the tears from your eyes. Let me clear the dust from your ears. Let me give you a sip of water, and let me wipe the dust away. And we can talk about these ideas of peace and unity and strength." And they could hear each other. They could hear each other in ways that they didn't know that they had the ability to understand each other. But it was working together and spending time together. And it wasn't just like, "Oh, get over yourself. Your village needs you. Oh, you've had enough of this grief." But that is one of the basic foundations of who we are, is community. Like the idea that you would exclude someone out of community. And in modern times, that would be jail. It would be suspension and expulsion from school. It would be, getting fired from work. Things like that. That very individualistic of get out of my community. That was a matter of life or death. And the ability to find ways to keep people in community, whatever that might look like, whether you like them or not, whether it's your community, maybe you can help them find a different community. And so they went on their walk together, and they tried to share more about these messages of peace and compassion and love and gratitude. And again, I'll stop there
Which essentially is a Pleiadian story. So would you say that the Peacemaker was another advent from the Pleiades, or that his mother, Gahedasuk, was related to the Pleiades, or maybe had a similar knowledge of birth technologies as the Pleiades did?
Yeah, I can't say no. And I think, the more we talk and the more we share, definitely leads to that understanding. But for me, it's not always about those specific connections about the past. It's what are we doing with it now?
Yeah.
And so we can take those messages and those instructions that we can engage with. And that's what we're doing right now, is having the space with with this conversation that we're having. We are actually following those original instructions.
It's so amazing. I know when we spoke, I realized I was getting an instruction, which was for us to have this conversation publicly, because this is exactly a part of the unity, the constitution of the human family, the coming together across divides. All the horrendous things that have happened to various peoples on the hands of various people. When we find out that a Pleiadian origin story unites us, that is very powerful. And when we find out that the same instructions are there whether it's for, Jesus and Mother Mary about creating peace in the world, or the Pleiades and Hiawatha and the Peacemaker. That is unity right there. That recognition of unity, I think, is so powerful. And then it's okay, what do we do from here? So let's talk about the Pleiades and governance. And maybe you could start by extending out the story of how Jigonhsasee came in, and then the role of Tadadaho, because that's extremely powerful when you've got an errant, troubled, traumatized individual who's wreaking havoc in a culture, which is so many people in our cultures, the rehabilitation of that being to become a leader. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about how the Peacemaker and Hiawatha encountered Jigonhsasee and what happened from there?
Yeah. So once Hiawatha and the Peacemaker were able to share their stories of grief and engage with that and have these conversations and really recognize that a lot of the grief has stemmed from violence. They started engaging with others, and they as they were walking across, and if you can imagine walking around, I mean, again, we have to kind of suspend our belief a little bit about how, like, the geography of it, but just imagine the whole of New York State, and walking across the entire thruway, and then walking across the Niagara River towards Toronto, on that southern Ontario peninsula, and then continuing along that path on the Great Lakes all the way from Toronto over to Ottawa, Montreal area, and then coming back down the Hudson, what we call the Hudson River. So putting the modern day names onto these geographies, it's a substantial walk. And so depending on the story, these two guys, they went wandering with some distinct instructions of furthering their message of peace. And they had been challenged, they had been questioned, they had, like, well, why should we believe you? Why should we put down our weapons of war when no one else has? And over the course of time, they did have some measures of folks saying, okay, I'm willing to give this a try. I'm tired. I'm tired of living in this violence. And they heard of this woman, Jigonhsasee, that she was at the crossroads, and ultimately she felt that she was helping. She had provided neutral territory where there was no violence, and she could kind of talk to folk and get to know them. She could provide them some sustenance. She could give them a place to rest. And as the Peacemaker and Hiawatha started engaging with her, they're letting her know that what she was doing was the right thing, but the reasoning behind it provided a complicitness to the violence.
Oh,
Does that make sense to you, that her providing comfort actually encouraged acts of violence, the
oh,
future acts of violence? She gave them the strength and the rest to be able to go out to battle.
oh, oh, goodness.
So if you can imagine that in our own lives, how often your good intentions actually led to a lack of being in alignment with the greater thing,
Right.
the bigger instructions. And so they spoke with her, and she's like, but I'm not promoting violence. But no, you're complicit in the violence. And she realized that. And then she realized, like, I know many of these people. I can still provide the same thing. But rather than encourage them to go on, I can encourage them in different ways of peace. And
Wow.
so then she connected with them, and then, continued to have these conversations. And the three of them met up with the people that were like, yeah, I would do this, but there's this guy, a Totoro, Um, and he is the most violent. He is the war chief. He is the most brutal. All of the things that lead to violence. And he's fearsome, and he has a head full of snakes as hair, and his body is bent into crooks and angles. And he is beyond evil, and he is not redeemable. And
Wow.
they had a conversation with him, and it didn't go well. And so then they went and they talked to more people, and they heard more stories, and more people were able to hear them as they went along. And then they went back again. Again, I'm doing quite a bit of shortcutting here.
Yeah.
That you know, to get us to the point of Adotero at one point realized how tired he was of the violence. And there was enough people that were putting resistance to his orders to continue the violence. There were folks that were like, you know, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't, that doesn't feel good to me. It's not right. I've lost too many people. And they started talking to Totoro, and they started talking to him about his message and what kind of person that he was, that all these people could listen to him. And they uplifted a lot of the positive attributes. And at the same time, they were combing the snakes from his hair, and they were putting salve and working his body to try to release the crooks and angles. And eventually he was able to get to a point, and they told him that because of the greatness that you have shown, you will be our leader, and you will have the title Tadadaho. You will be the leader of our men, and you will unify all of our warring nations and come together within this confederacy. And he got to that point, and he agreed. And we still have someone right now carrying that title of Tadadaho, the chief of chiefs.
Yeah. Yeah. That
And,
I've been aware of that whenever I go to gatherings, and
mhm,
it stuns me, you know, to hear
mhm,
that title that has continued on as a male leadership title. Um,
mhm.
so Tadadaho, the one who became Tadadaho,
Totoro.
a Totoro, so what was really like the little flip turning point? Hiawatha and the Peacemaker were speaking with him, and they
And
appealed,
Jigonhsasee as well. You
and
know,
Jigonhsasee,
it's just the three of them.
it's like they appealed to his own exhaustion, right?
Mhm.
In holding that violent energy, right? It takes tremendous amounts of violent energy. So they appealed to his exhaustion and just began showing him a different way, or just speaking.
Yeah, just uplifting, you know, like so many people listen to you. Can you imagine what could happen if you yourself said put down your weapons of war? If you yourself said let the blood wars go, if you yourself said let's figure out how to trade and have this abundance of resources rather than being a scarcity of resources.
Amazing. You know, it's like the same story, no matter what culture, no matter what era, right? You have people who are fighting to grab, they're creating carnage and death and suffering. And probably it's because of Atotoro that Hiawatha's whole family was killed on some level, whether
Yeah, most
directly or
likely. Yeah.
indirectly, you know. And so they had to overcome their own grief. Peacemaker helped Hiawatha overcome his own grief so that then he could come to forgiveness, right?
Mhm.
And then they could speak at this high level leadership function way to Totoro and really get to know him and persuade him through skillful means, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
incredible skillful means. But then the rehabilitation of this man to comb out the snake. So whatever was going on, they were healing him shamanically, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Physically, energetically. I mean, the crooks and the snakes, the crooks, and these are like to some degree metaphors, right, for his soul,
Mhm.
the crookedness of his soul. And it's like, you know, any story like the the Scrooge, or the Grinch or whatever, that suddenly just that rehabilitation, to me, that is like the ultimate Pleiadian thing, because unity is one thing, but being able to take, embrace, and rehabilitate those who are perpetuating the opposite, that's the great skill today. And that's what we're all faced with when we're looking at the political system, the warfare system, and even for many people, the interdimensional system, where there are many beings that are not friendly to life. They're not friendly to the human family. And there has to be a level of forgiveness and rehabilitation, going into the star beings and the star nations themselves. And that this, even the first peoples were fighting. They had been infected with this virus, right? It wasn't all, oh, indigenous people are all great, and then the white people came and caused all the problems. There was already that stuff within, like everywhere on the planet, right? But they, at least the Haudenosaunee, had developed then the actual instructions, which then take the place or are described in the Great Law, right?
Yes.
So the whole Pleiadian wisdom was translated into the Great Law. They rehabilitated this most horrible of warlords and showed him how much greater he could be, and then began the era of peace, right, for the 5 and 6 nations.
Right. And as a Tuscarora, we've only been in the we entered the Little Brothers in around 1730, roughly.
Wow.
So maybe 1722, somewhere in there, depending on, again, your history books and who you talk to. And I think about certain things that when we came up from North Carolina, we had wandered away. We're also known as the wandering Tuscaroras. And so we had wandered away from somewhere in this area and landed in the North Carolina, Wilmington area on the ocean, wandered back up in the 1700s, 1713, roughly.
Wow.
And our Mohawk brothers said, "Welcome home." And while you were away, we have done this. We have something now that engages with your grief, that engages with leadership, that engages with this unity that you are probably not familiar with. You were gone before it started, and you were gone when it started. And now welcome. And they gave us a set of instructions to follow. And it's only been recently, within the last 20, 30 years, that us as Tuscaroras have met some of those criteria that were offered to us 300 years ago.
Whoa.
And we were never told to get out. We were not given a deadline. Like, okay, you need to get all this taken care of in 10 years. You need to get this done in 50 years. You need to, like, hey, 100 years later, you're still struggling. Okay. There was never the threat of removing us from community. But
extraordinary.
But the patience that it has taken, and the ability for us to have to work around through everything that we've worked through, as you mentioned, boarding schools, as you mentioned, reservations, as you've mentioned, assimilation, all of those things we have had to work through. And eventually we will get the smoke off of our wampum. There is 6 strands of wampum. 5 strands are white and 1 is black. 1 is blackened by soot, because we need to get all that taken care of. We need to have the dust wiped off of us. We need to have our ears cleared. We need to have the tears wiped from our eyes, and we need to have that cool water to go into our bodies.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, so the Great Law, these messages took, there's some folks, some of our elders say 100 to 120 years, which means it's multi-generational.
Yes.
And it still has to hold on. So it's even more generational.
Wow.
And I think about my great-grandmother being at Carlisle Industrial School, and she was graduated in 1902. So that is now 127 some years, and that I have a grandchild that can speak Mohawk. I don't speak much of the language, but my son does, and
Wow.
his child does. Um, so it can ebb and flow. But again, those original instructions that we were spoken to, if we don't hold them and practice them, we can go into ceremony. And sometimes ceremony might look like this, Marguerite, just having these conversations and being witnessed.
That's profound. I just want everybody to take a moment with that. Things happen in modern ways, and this is one way of having ceremony, being on YouTube in a conversation, right? Because it has to be relevant for the times. Like you're saying, it's not about the past, it's about the now and the future and what's needed and what's happening, and the tools that are available now to get on the vibration of the old original instructions, but those instructions transcend form, right, of how that might look. So that is fascinating that you all have the longer term multi-generational picture and patience. That's another virtue, another instruction, persisting and persisting through the decimations and the almost near loss of the cultures, the cultural understandings, the languages, right? But hanging on to what is there so you can hang on to the original story and the original instructions. That's happening now. And you are engaged in that in many different ways through your work.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about how your work of following the original instructions of unity and peace are being manifested in your life and your work.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for that invitation. And again, it feels like we're just opening doors and opening cupboards and seeing what's in there. And it's like, ooh, what can we make in the future?
Yeah.
And whether it's conversations with each other or with the people that we're engaged with, it all makes a difference. And the work I do, it can be known as restorative justice.
Yeah.
Restorative practices. It can be known as alternative dispute resolution. It can be known as conflict resolution. There's lots of different ways to engage with it. But for me, it's about engaging with relationships and how to be engaged with people rather than for people, to people, or disregarding those relationships. And it's not just about people, it's about land as well, and those connections. And some of the work I do actually involves all those things, but it's also about organizational behaviors and um, structures, the structures that uphold ways of being and ways of doing that perpetuate harms that end up hurting people and relationships. And so when you think about your relationship with institutions, just say, let's say education, higher education, even, your relationship as a student is different than a professor to that institution. Within a department, a chair of a department has a different relationship to that institution than a adjunct professor that's just new into the system or for a single class. And so all of that can create conditions for harm. And so I always work with colleagues, and we work with these conditions of harms that are created and the impact on their relationships and whatever ruptures that might be, or whatever reconnections. And sometimes it's always about accountability. It's always about responsibility. And sometimes it's about finding a different way of being engaged in that community where it is not a severance, where it is not an exclusion. It is not about a removal of self, because that to me is symptomatic of chronic individualism.
Mm-hmm.
These institutions are about they are rife with with chronic individualism, and the afflictions and the impact of that affliction is devastating to us as community beings. It actually is counter to collective being.
Well, I can attest to that, having been in higher academia and run screaming to create Seven Sisters Mystery School. Okay. And luckily, I had the support at the time, somebody who helped me make that bridge and be able to do it, because I could see, all the many ways of what you're describing is going on in there. And I was participatory in it, like I was trained various individualized ways and argumentation. And, it was, I mean, I'm not excluding myself from being part of the problem. But yeah, I mean, in any of our institutions, we have these harm-making ideas, values, mechanisms, processes, and so forth. And so the deconstruction and reconstruction of all that is a huge job. And I know that you do it every day in every little way. Do you work one-on-one with people? You work in groups and that kind of thing?
All of the things. Again, it's a way of being in practice. So circle practice is one of the things that I do on the regular. I do get hired by organizations, me and colleagues, and we create ways of engaging with the structural harms as well as the interpersonal harms. We do a lot of community building, and just sharing this message of, it's going to take a while, but this is how you can do it. It's been done before, and these are the instructions. And so I don't really have much, my responsibility is to share. And I'm not accountable to too many other people, but I am accountable to the greater.
That's
to
right.
the collective,
Yeah.
to every being that I didn't share at the beginning. I just uplifted the stars, but there's a whole slew of things that I'm accountable to if I
Right.
don't share this message. And
Yeah.
not everybody gets it, and it's okay. I've been on called into processes where the people are like, yeah, this all sounds good. Yeah, we don't have the time, the money, or the interest, and we will be accountable in our own way. And we part our ways, because I have to meet someone where they're at. I have to be much like that peacemaker when Hiawatha is screaming and raging. I have to be able to sit there until they're ready to be able to be stood next to, and then walk with them, and then offer words.
That is so amazing. And let's talk about you being a woman and the role of the Jigonhsasee today. In a way, I see you as carrying that role, even though I don't think they have that title for women now,
Oh,
but
they do. It's just called clan mother. It's called into a different thing.
okay, well,
And
great. So, because the Pleiades story is essentially a female story. I mean, it's the advent of Sky Woman and her sky sisters ultimately, and feminine values in a way. So what is the role of the clan mothers today, and you being part
well,
of that?
yeah. Clan mothers. I'm not a clan mother, but in terms of
Yeah.
the mother person, Jigonhsasee, the keepers of the land, are the roles. They feel very gendered, and that's not to say that they are completely gendered. That was more of a later construct, but the non-academic framing for this is that if you have a role and you fulfilling your responsibilities, it doesn't matter as much of what role you're taking, but typically there is ways of engaging I guess aspects of roles and responsibilities. And the clan mothers are the ones that will tell the warriors when to go into war. The responsibility is the food, both the preparation and frequently the gardening, not the hunting. There's just different ways of engaging this. The ways of this, and so the clan mother chooses the chiefs, and the chiefs generally have to get input, because the people of the clan go to the clan mother and tell their stories, and then the clan mother shares these stories with the chief in deciding what to do. And so when you think about war chiefs, if you're not at war, what are you doing? You have to have another role, and you have to have other responsibilities. And so, being a person that I do have a clan, and for a long time, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to do anything because I had a clan. I also worked in the school system for over 20 years. And that was my version of being Jigonhsasee. Like, I'm working in this system that's complicit, and I'm no longer in that school anymore. And you mentioned that just with your own story, Marguerite, that at a certain points you are playing Jigonhsasee before the Peacemaker and Hiawatha came and shared, like, hey, complicit, let's see how you can embody these instructions with your values and create a different experience.
Yeah.
And so, again, sharing things, trying to uplift myself into spaces where I haven't, because I had lived on the reservation. I did all the work there with my own people, and most of the work was done towards me. I'm the one who's learning. I'm the one in this collective. And now I'm not living in that space right now. So now my role and responsibility is different to share this with others.
Wow. That's profoundly, beautifully and profoundly put. And in our final moments here, let's talk about how people can find out about you, or what kind of work you are available to do for people one-on-one.
Yeah, well, definitely one-on-one. I definitely, I consider myself like a squash plant. I'm highly emergent. I am responsive to invitations. So I am trying to stay out of a lot of the interpersonal harm type things, just because of my place in the world right now. Is I'm just a little tired, and the work that we were speaking of takes a lot of energy. Yeah. And I do know that if I'm tired, I make more mistakes, and I myself can create harm in those conditions. Mm-hmm. And so I try to move that. I do circles, I do restorative justice trainings, community buildings, some organizational conflict resolution type stuff, and have a website that I think is going to be in your YouTube reference notes. I think that was indicated.
Yeah, but could you just give us the URL for that?
Yeah, it's collectivewisdoms.org.
Okay, great. We'll make sure that that's in the show notes. Any final words from the Pleiades for us today going forward, just letting you intuitively tune in and see what comes up?
Well, I absolutely just, and these might be Pleiadian words, or I know they are a part of who we are as Haudenosaunee people. I started with a little bit of the words before all else. I need to close with, to the best of our ability, that we share what we have learned today, that we talk about these stars and the other connected beings, and anything that we didn't mention today can find a way to be told, to be witnessed, to be shared with each other. And the invitation is for all of you to find ways to have these conversations, whether it be with Marguerite, whether it be with me, whether it be with someone else that's not been a part of your conversations, or just even within yourself. So
burning that tobacco and letting the smoke waft up and saying, hello, could you help? I just would love to connect, right?
Right.
I
Right.
love that. I love that. I love that. Yeah, tobacco spirit, right? Straight up.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Well, Kristine, this has just been wonderful. So illuminating, showing us new angles on an old story, and showing us the continuity of this
Mhm.
story throughout time and across us as people.
Right.
And I know that it has inspired me. I'm sure it's inspiring many people who are watching or who will be watching. And we encourage everybody to like this video, share it, subscribe to the Marguerite Rigoglioso YouTube channel, check out the offerings of Seven Sisters Mystery School.com, and also Kristine Hill, Chrissy, collectivewisdoms.org, correct?
Correct.
All right. And with that, we are on time, and I will just say goodbye to everybody for now. Mwah.
Bye, everyone.